The second to last week of the regular season is complete, and it sets up still some interesting things for week 9, our final week of the regular season. But we do know a few things. That top seed is locked up, and actually those bottom 2 seeds are also locked up. So we're going to break all that down, give you a little playoff preview, and what the final week of the regular season means for some playoff seeding. Every team makes the playoffs. We'll get to all of that and more here on the postgame show. I have Wyatt, Colin, and Chris. If your microphone sounds a little funny, it's not you, it's me. I sound horrible right now, but we'll power through it. And if I squeak, y'all can get a good laugh out of that. My voice is in shambles right now. But let's get to the most anticipated matchup of week 8, the Road Dogs and Lob City. A close game, a tied game through 3 quarters. It is Lob City pulling out that game. We'll get it to Chris right away. I'll kind of break down what that means for both of those teams and their potential playoff seeds. I'll tease it with the loss still opens up the door for the Road Dogs to somehow, after all of this, be the 4 seed. Not a knock at them. They played a really good game. I talked with them before the game. I talked with them after the game. And again, I use the phrase a lot, it doesn't really matter till the playoffs, but this game mattered for how it went, despite both teams missing some players. So Chris, let's get it there and really what the difference was for Lob City and what you saw throughout this one. A very close competitive game between Lob City and the Road Dogs.
I think the biggest thing for the Road Dogs is that they were able to do what a lot of other teams couldn't do. They were able to play like a physical game, and they were kind of able to throw off Lob City in a way that they haven't really seen before. I think just overall, Road Dogs had like has probably the second biggest size on any team other than Lob City. So I think they had to just kind of over time get used to that. And like we talked about, Lob City only had, I think it was 5 players. So that was a big thing to have to overcome. I know that in the first half, they're taking a lot of threes, which isn't really Lob City's game. They're a big transition team, and being able to right after they get the rebound to be able to go into in transition and get the dunks, which they weren't really able to do in the first half. But in the second half, they're able to kind of put the things together. And then the Road Dogs had, I think, Mark Washington fouled out, so that definitely didn't help the Road Dogs out. But I think over time, Lob City was able to wear the Road Dogs down to the point where they couldn't capitalize on what they were able to do in the first half.
And I'm going to go over some stats here. We'll go back to Chris in a second, only because it was a very big game between 2 of the top teams in the standings. So, Chris, get ready kind of which stat stands out to you, and I'll kind of go over some of the scores and other stuff really quick. But you mentioned some of the key things. So, Mark Washington did foul out with 7:20 left in the fourth. At that point, it was Lob City by 4, and then it got to as much, they ended up winning by double digits, I believe. So it was close, and it was a big fourth quarter for Lob City, much of it without Mark Washington for the Road Dogs. Lob City only had 4 guys until the third quarter. So they had their 5th player show up in the third quarter, Josh Smith, and he, played a little bit. I know he's been hurt a little bit, so he's been there, but not playing. So it really was Cody Crawford, Colin Burns, Nuri Mahmoud, and Joe Secator. And really for Lob City, Joe Secator with 29. We're going to get to the 3-point shooting in a second that Chris talked about. Colin Burns with 12 and 12. Nuri with 5 and 6. Cody Crawford with only 5 points, 1 of 9 from 3. And I think that was a huge part for Lob City. I might steal Chris's thunder a little bit, but that 3-point shooting was a struggle. I mean, 3 of 21 for Lob City on the game, so not like them. I don't care who they have. Cody Crawford started 0 of 8 at least. I mean, I think that makes sense, right? If he ended 1 for 9, yes. So he made the last one when it was kind of already sealed. It was in the final 2 minutes. So we started 0 of 8. And if Cody's not hitting when he's one of the 4 guys playing the entire time, right? That kind of allows you to kind of relax a little bit there defensively and almost pack it in a little more. And I think we saw that, and it kind of kept things slower and didn't allow Lob City to get on some of those runs, because Cody had some great looks, and I don't even have to talk to him to know he would admit that he was open and just wasn't hitting, his first 8. And so it kind of allowed the Road Dogs to stay in it. Just some more stats for the Road Dogs. Rion Watts with 15 and 12. So really, as their lead guard, a ton of rebounds for him and kind of kept possessions alive. 5 offensive rebounds for him. Masio Moreno with 9 points. Mark Washington with 8. He struggled as well. 3 of 10 from the floor, 1 of 6 from 3. And he's one of their better shooters we've talked about week in and week out. Anthony Lyons 1 of 12. So even, it was just a offensive struggle for both teams. I mean, neither team shot over 35% from the floor and 6 of 33 for the Road Dogs for three. So I guess forget the 3-point shooting, Chris. I kind of already went there. So hopefully you're ready with something else because that was clear that just both teams kind of missing shots. But what other stat from this one stood out to you as far as, the difference between these two teams?
I think the biggest obvious difference, just looking at the stats, is the amount of free throws that were attempted by each team. Only 6 from the Road Dogs in comparison to 27 for Lob City. So, like we talked about, the 3-pointers were not going down for either team, and the way that the game was being played, it was a very physical game, and there were a lot of fouls on both ends. Like we saw, I think as a team, the Road Dogs put up 19 fouls, which is a lot of fouls. So they're making Lob City work for their points and make those shots at the free throw line. But I think just over time, Lob City was kind of they were doing what they were able to do other teams, but the Road Dogs weren't letting them get to the basket as easily. They were able to kind of defend some of those shots more and make them work for those points that other teams might have struggled with doing.
You talked about the free throw shooting, and I think they started making much more of their free throws in the fourth quarter, which allowed them to get that cushion. So, they missed only 7, which seems pretty good. 5 or 6 of those were in the first 2 to 3 quarters for sure. And they really started hitting those free throws like I talked about for Lob City in the fourth quarter. Yeah, I mean, about game flow, it's a low scoring game, defensive struggle for sure. It's a defensive battle, offensive struggle for sure. And like I talked about with that win, Lob City locks up the 1 seed because they have a 2-game lead and the head-to-head tiebreaker over everybody. And they get ready in that final week of the season. We're kind of going back to week 6, making up some games. Lob City will take on Unaffiliated, who's looking for their first win. So that game for both teams, we'll get to Unaffiliated's week 8 matchup in a second. That game has no playoff implications, but obviously both teams are still going to play in week 9, we're going to call it. As for the Road Dogs with that loss, they fall to 5-2, the same record as the Halfway Crooks who won. We're going to get to that game next. But now that sets up the winner of that week 9 matchup between the Halfway Crooks and Road Dogs, getting that 2 seed. The Regulators are still alive. We're going to get to them in a second for that 3 seed, but the Halfway Crooks can't fall below 3. So kind of sticking on the Road Dogs. A win in week 9 gets them up to the 2 seed. If they lose and the Regulators win in week 9, the Road Dogs could be the 4 seed. And as you know, it's the 1 and the 4 seed kind of on the same side and the 2 and the 3. So that could set up a Road Dogs Lob City semifinal matchup potentially if some things fall that way. So that's kind of what's alive for both teams in week 9. Let's get to the Halfway Crooks who took care of the Gym Rats in week 8. And the Halfway Crooks improved to 5-2. We'll go right to Wyatt. Kind of save my voice as I break down some more of the playoff stuff, and I'll give you kind of the scenarios for all the teams as we go through the week 8 matchups. But Wyatt, a close game in the third, I'm pretty sure, still at that point. Yeah, a little too close. And then it was a big fourth quarter in this one as well that allowed the Halfway Crooks to pull away. But Wyatt first on what the Halfway Crooks were able to do.
Like you said, it was a close game going in the fourth. It was a 6-point game, actually. And everything fell apart for the Gym Rats. I mean, the Halfway Crooks started scoring more. I mean, in the beginning of the game, it just looked like the Halfway Crooks were like showing off a little bit. They knew they were the better team there, and they're doing a lot of flashy plays. And this game was full of highlights, a lot of big dunks, big lobs, even a lob from you. And so, but for the Gym Rats, you had Thomas DeAndrea, where he had 32 points and he had 23 rebounds. He was on the boards the whole night. It was like when you're watching that game, you saw him grab everything. But for the Crooks, they played well all around. You had Charles Alexander with 29, Devin Pina with 20, Ethan Austin with 20, Charles Correa with 18. I mean, that's pretty crazy. That's a lot of scoring coming from a lot of different people.
And I know the Gym Rats, like you listed off some stats. I love it. You saved me having to do it. Let's go to Colin quick. I mean, the Gym Rats not having Brandon Whitman a factor. I mean, he's one of their better players. Thomas DeAndrea picked up the slack for sure. But, what'd you see, Colin, quickly in this one before we kind of get to the other 2 matchups we have here? Maybe not, but they were both pretty close. And so, those are kind of all those other teams in the middle that we're getting to. But what you see from the halfway crooks in this one is they get ready to take on the road dogs, like we talked about, a huge matchup coming up.
Right. So yeah, you covered what I was going to say about it being very close up until the third. That caught me by surprise, just because, as you mentioned, Brandon Whitman was not playing. But I do have to say that Brandon Whitman makes a great coach. He was there. He was getting their guys into it, and calling out, you gotta get moving, go back door, watch off the screens. He was up and loving it, and he was loving the intensity they were giving, and he liked all their guys scoring. But for halfway crooks, you guys really just put the gas pedal in the fourth, and you just steamrolled them in the fourth. And I think that once it comes down to the playoffs, if that was a playoff atmosphere, it wouldn't be as flashy as you guys were. But yeah, like there was mentioned, there were some good highlights, and Ethan Austin had a crazy behind the back lob, and yeah, halfway crooks, when it comes down to the playoff atmosphere, you won't see as much as the flashiness. You'll see more of when they're running the fast break. It's just going to be easier dunks, not some crazy lobs. But yeah,
I sure hope so. It's gonna have to be, and I think come playoff time it will be a lot of what Colin said. Yeah, I mean, we kind of went over all the stats. I don't want to stay too long on this one, but the playoff implications from this one, like I talked about, the halfway crooks are either the 2 or the 3 seed. So a win in week 9 gets them that 2 seed. A loss, they're the 3 seed. Like we talked about, the team they're playing, the Road Dogs, could fall to 4. We're going to get to the Regulators, who gets in that mix in a second. And the Gym Rats, with their 1 win over unaffiliated, they can't go to 8, and they can't really get to 6, no matter what happens. So the Gym Rats are locked in that 7 seed, regardless of what happens in week 9. Let's get to that Regulators game, because we talked about last week, if the Regulators were to win out, they could get up to a 2 seed. Well, they do fall to the Owl Waves, so that kind of eliminates that 2 seed potential, but they could still get on that side of the bracket with a 3 seed. And so that's kind of really, not that it doesn't matter what seed you are, but some of the placement in the bracket may matter for some of the matchups down the road. And the Regulators with the loss can still win their final game, and then they would need some help from the Road Dogs, like we talked about, but it is still in play for a 3 seed. They control their own destiny for a 4 seed, but let's kind of get to what happened, and it'll go back to Chris in a second, as the Regulators fall by 3 to All Waves. And a close game. I was kind of bouncing back and forth, so I do want to get to Chris on this one and exactly what happened. But Tommy McSparron, another good game. Doug Whedon, 7 for 9 shooting. I know it was kind of a close game down the stretch, and the Regulators had a chance to tie it. The half-court shot almost went. I will say it almost banked in and would have forced overtime. But obviously you'd like to be in control of that game if you're the Regulators with so much at stake. But I'll continue the playoff stuff in a second. Let's give the Owl Waves some credit too. I mean, they're now in the fight for the 4 seed, and I'll go over that potential log jam at 4, 5, 6. But focusing on this game, Chris, and what the Owl Waves were able to do to get the win. And I kind of want to give me 1 second. I mean, they won last week against the Air Mambas, and then they lost, before that snow week. So I was going to say, is it a winning streak for the Owl Waves? They talked about it in their interview. They've kind of gone on a little bit of a run here. But what'd you see in week 8 from them, Chris?
I think the biggest thing, obviously, they were able to take advantage of the fact the Regulators only had 5 guys. I think either way, I think Always would have put up a good game, but obviously that was a big thing. I think we talked about the other game with the energy. The Always are a team that feeds off the energy. They're kind of a team that starts slow, but they always seem to kind of, in the second and third quarter, play their best game. And I know Nick Montini, he had a really big game. He would seem like nobody on the Regulators could really stop him when he went in the paint. But I think the biggest thing with them was just the energy. I think they kind of knew that the Regulators, not that they were like a disadvantage, but they knew that most of the guys were gonna have to play most of the games. So I think they were able to kind of take advantage of that. And I think just the overall energy of the All Waves is what allowed them to win. Because I know Corey and some other guys on the bench kept the guys going, just kept the spirits high, because in the fourth quarter, it seemed like the Regulators were going to kind of pull away with it, even though it wasn't really like a high score in like last quarter. It seemed like the Regulators were going to pull away a little bit at the end, but then the All Waves in like the last couple of minutes kind of came back and stole the win.
And for the Owl Waves, Nicholas Montanino, 24 and 6, Josh DePino with 15, and Terrence Gallo with 13, Andrew Valley with 11 and 3 made threes. He's been shooting it really well. I think he's been a big part of that team getting going, and he adds to that momentum for them for sure. Tommy McSparron with 22, and he made 5 threes himself. So shout out to him again this week. Justin Titsworth, 5 of 7, and only 1 3. Joey Cordero, 3 of 11 for 3. I'm sure he would have liked to have, kind of built on that lead you were talking about, Chris, and kind of, help the Regulators, maintain their lead. So the Owl Waves improved to 3 and 4. The Regulators fall to 4 and 3, and the Air Mambas win, which we're going to get to that last game in a second. They improved to 3 and 4. So the Regulators are the 4 seed at 4 and 3. The standings are up on our website. You can go check those out. The All Waves are 3 and 4, and the Air Mambas are 3 and 4. And in that last week of the regular season, it is Air Mambas Regulators. Okay, so 2 of those teams play. So let's focus on the Regulators and let's kind of get them out of the way first. The Regulators, because of the loss, with a win next week, can still be the 3 seed. If they lose next week, they could potentially fall to a 6 seed. And I'll go over kind of if there's a 3-team tie where those 3 teams, the Regulators, All Waves, and Air Mambas, could all be 4 and 4 next week, after next week. Okay, and if that's the case, the head-to-head won't work. And it'll be point differential, which I will tell you where that stands as of right now after we go over that last game. So Regulators could be 3, they could fall to 6. Okay. As for the Owl Waves, they've played themselves into that mix. And if they win next week over the Gym Rats, they would need a Regulators loss to possibly still get the 4, but they could also fall to 6. So the Owl Waves are kind of between that 4 to 6 range. They semi-control their own destiny. They need a win to kind of keep that 4 seed hope alive. Okay. If the Owl Waves lose, follow me, and the Air Mambas win next week over the Regulators, the Owl Waves are the 6. So to avoid that 6 seed for sure, the Owl Waves need a win, right? If they lose it, almost certainly, not for sure, but again, it's like dependent on other games, right? But that's the All Waves and Regulators. Let's get to the Air Mambas who get a win and get into that 3-way near tie for 4, 5, and 6. The Air Mambas do take care of unaffiliated in week 8 by 6. And so a back and forth game, a close game. Let's go to Colin first this time on that one and kind of what you saw from the Air Mambas being able to squeak out the win.
Yeah, so this game was full of runs. No one can really step on the opponent's throat. There was always, it would go 10-point swing one way, 10-point swing the other. And when it came down to it, Air Mambas outscored unaffiliated. It was 22-11 in the fourth quarter. And that's what really mattered the most. And in the third quarter, unaffiliated actually was outscoring them 25-11. So, it's just a game back and forth runs. And, Air Mambas really had put a stop to Eric Fowler in the paint because, he had 14 offensive rebounds, and it seems like a lot of those came in the first, second, and third quarter, and then they really shut them down in the fourth, so that's what helped them out a lot. And they also had a higher 3-point percentage. They hit 4 more threes than unaffiliated did. That definitely helped them out because if you look at the stats, unaffiliated really played a very well game, and it's surprising to me looking at the stats, seeing that they lost this game, but I think that was the key for Air Mambas to get the win.
And we'll go to Wyatt. I might steal his thunder because I'll kind of go over some of the stats that they don't mention in a second. 46-27 rebounding edge for unaffiliated, right? And kind of to Colin's point, a lot of that edge may have been in the first 3 quarters. That's still a near 20 rebound edge at the end of a game, right? So I guess my point is not that I don't care, but it doesn't matter how big that edge was in the first 3 quarters. You should still be able to take advantage of dominating the glass to be able to win a game like this. So I guess, Wyatt, I'm going to throw it to you that way. Was it just the Air Mambas making more shots? Did they figure out something on the rebounding edge to kind of, get that lead back? Like, what flipped? Because a lot of times you'll see in these games, and then I promise I'm going to get Wyatt in here, but a lot of times you'll see, maybe a team is out rebounding another team by 10 at halftime, right? And you could feel it, like, oh, that team is killing the glass. And then it almost evens itself out, in a close game like this, where the stats will finish much closer, but it was kind of a flip-flop game with the rebounding. And it's one of those things you can feel. Sometimes the numbers lie, but you could feel, and I'm sure in this game, it was like, oh my God, unaffiliated's getting every rebound. Like they're eating them up, like offensively, defensively. It's just everything is going to them. So why, even though that the game finished with that large margin of rebounds, what were the Air Mambas able to do to overcome that?
Well, I feel like a lot of the rebounds were like rebounds that meant very little. They were like second chance rebounds because they would miss the layup, grab the ball, and then put it back up. It would happen a couple times throughout the game. It happened quite a bit actually. So like during the game, like towards the end of the third quarter, the unaffiliated was on a 15-0 run, which was, you felt the momentum of the game really switching there. And I thought unaffiliated was going to be able to pull it out. They had a dominant streak. And then I think, well, I talked to Mario Valerio and Mark DaCosta after the game, and they talked about their defense. Their defense is what won the game. And I agree with that. They were able to stop Eric Fowler from going to the paint, and he wasn't getting much action at all in the fourth quarter. And a big problem with unaffiliated I saw was there wasn't much out of any other players except for Joey Niederberger and Eric Fowler. Because if you see, they shot 76%, and then Eric Fowler shot 66%, and the rest of the team was under 30% shooting. So if they got production from the other people on the team, I feel like they could have pulled it out.
You mentioned those two for unaffiliated. They've been good all season. I think that's fair to say. Joey Niederberger led the way with 22 and 7. Eric Fowler down low, and he made a 3 with 21 points and 20 rebounds, like we talked about. Seth Coates, one of those players who can make some threes. He was 3 of 14. So to Wyatt's point, makes a few more, and we could say that for a lot of players, but just someone else kind of making a few more shots. And Anthony Torres, 3 points. Sorry, 3 points for him. And 9 rebounds, so really helping on the glass. The Air Mambas, let's give them a shout out in the win. 22 points and 7 rebounds for Mario Valerio. So 3 made threes as well. Luis Ramirez, 8 of 11. Luis Ramirez, and we don't talk about him a lot. Not that I need to give him a shout out here. I like watching him. He'll shoot it and he'll make some shots. He'll rebound. He'll then try to go dunk over somebody. Just does a little bit of everything. And I think, especially for this Air Mambas team, kind of almost leaning on him more is not that I'm all knowing here, but is what I would try to do down the stretch. And you get into a playoff game, like let's kind of make sure he's involved with kind of his style of play. Mark DaCosta, 13 points, 3 threes for him. We talked about the rebounding edge, and yeah, I mean let's kind of get to the Air Mambas playoff scenario. We talked about unaffiliated. They're in that 8 seed, so they will be getting Lob City in 2 weeks from now in the playoffs as those two teams are locked in. And then we're going to have you guys kind of rank or put in order your 4, 5, and 6 seeds. So I'll give you the tiebreaker if they all were to finish tied, and I'll get back to that in a second. But I'm going to go around quick, and that's how we'll end it. So between the Regulators, All Waves, Air Mambas, what order you think those 3 teams are going to finish, okay? For the Air Mambas, they get the Regulators next week. Right? I believe so. Am I crazy? Give me 1 second. Sorry. Yes. Air Mambas Regulators. Okay. So in week 9, they'll get them. If they win, they could still get up to a 4 seed. So the Air Mambas are still kind of in play to kind of come out on top of those 3 teams. If they lose and the All Waves win, the Air Mambas could be a 6 seed. So they're kind of in that 4 to 6 range. All right. And so, like I talked about, we have the Regulators at 4 and 3. They're playing the 3 and 4 Air Mambas. The All Waves at 3 and 4 next week. I know I mentioned they're playing the Gym Rats. Okay, so let's focus on those 3 teams: Regulators, All Waves, Air Mambas. If the Regulators win, like I talked about, they get the 4 seed because they would have 5 wins. Okay, if they lose, that's kind of what we need to happen here. If the Regulators lose to the Air Mambas, it kind of gets a possible 3-way tie of 4 and 4 teams: Regulators, All Waves, Air Mambas. If all 3 of those teams are tied at 4 and 4, we can't do head-to-head, because the All Waves and Air Mambas played twice. They split, so there's no clear head-to-head winner. All right. So if all 3 of those teams are 4 and 4, stay with me, I promise. Okay. Then it's point differential, which means your margins of victory throughout the season, plus minus, and that would be how we break a 3-way 4 and 4 tie. So right now, again, we would have to take into account the result of that final game, but right now, the Regulators have a +4 point differential. The All Waves have a -19 point differential. And I almost couldn't believe it, but the Air Mambas do have a -85 point differential. Okay. So in a three-way tie, and while I'm talking this out, I really want to make sure because it's hard to believe, but I have an Excel sheet going and I have the math. Yeah. Okay. Minus 85. So in a three-way tie, the Air Mambas are getting that 6 seed. Okay. So the Air Mambas need a win and some help next week. The Always, I mean, unless they win by, they'd have to win by a ridiculous margin. Okay. The All Waves minus 19 could catch the Regulators. So it's going to matter kind of who wins by how much next week. But that's the point differential as of right now. And we'll have that next week if we need it. We'll go to Chris first because he talked the farthest ago in the show. And I know we're going to get these guys out of here in a second. But of those three teams, Chris, Regulators obviously in the pole position for that 4 seed. But which team do you like is the 4 seed, the 5 seed, and the 6 seed? Like, what do you think is going to happen next week? Regulators, All Waves, Air Mambas.
I think it's going to go like kind of how the standings are now. I think Regulators 4, Always 5, and Air Mambas are going to finish in the 6.
Why?
I think the Regulators are the most like balanced team out of all of the teams. I think the Always and the Air Mambas are the most like top heavy teams, and the fact that I think they have a lot of guys who score at the top, but the other guys don't really, not that they don't contribute as much in terms of like the points, but at the same time, obviously we see the Air Mambas with a minus 85 point differential. They're gonna have to hopefully be able to work on that if they want to be able to make a playoff run. I think just the Regulators are just the best overall team out of all of them.
All right, we'll do Wyatt next. Really, with your 4 seed pick, you're kind of picking, do you think the Regulators are going to win next week? Right? That's kind of built into this ranking. So what order do you have, Wyatt?
I hate to be boring, but I got the same thing. I think the Regulators are going to beat the Air Mambas. I mean, the Air Mambas are good, but they go on they're very streaky. So, like, on defense, they'll shut down a team. And you saw it in the last game. They held unaffiliated to like 11 points in one quarter, but then they also gave up 22 in a quarter. So they're a very streaky team. So I think they're going to lose that game. And the All Waves have been looking a lot better. So I think they're going to get the 5th seed. Yeah.
Right. And that would set up what I think would be the kind of the 2 hottest teams right now of this group, which would be the Regulators and All Waves, and that 4-5 potentially playing in that first round. So I think that'd be awesome. But the Air Mambas have something to say about that. Colin, what's your order?
I also had the same list, but I think that just because if Air Mambas plus minus differential wasn't as bad as it would be different. And I think that when it comes down to actual play in the playoffs, I'm taking Air Mambas over All Waves almost every time. But just because their plus minus is so much worse, everyone else is there at such a big disadvantage. But if that wasn't the case, I would put the Air Mambas above All Waves because I think they're like Wyatt just said, they're streaky and they're getting hot at the right time. So I think going into the playoffs, they're gonna make some noise.
And, we could potentially, I mean, with the point differential, it almost makes it impossible. But to Colin's point, All Waves and Air Mambas is a 4-5 technically could happen, but that point differential makes it very difficult for the Air Mambas to kind of leapfrog one of these teams if they all were to be tied, right? And so because, if each of these teams was playing someone not in the group that we're talking about, it'd be different. Because the Air Mambas play the Regulators, there's only so many results. Like, someone has to win that game, right? The Regulators or the Air Mambas, like both those teams can't lose. So it limits the amount of possibilities here. So I was going to say this before, it's better to be right than not boring. I know that's the weirdest way to say that, but why it was like, I'm boring, I'm giving the same thing. It's better to be right than, I don't know, interesting, whatever, right? You want to be right. Yeah, so that would set up, kind of in that scenario really quick, and then we'll get out of here. The 4 plays the 5, so we're looking at possibly a Regulators All Waves matchup. I guess, in that scenario, you guys are kind of picking the Regulators to win. We may have just kind of speculated all of that for nothing, because if that is the case, just one last time, if the Regulators win and then the halfway crooks beat the Road Dogs, the Regulators would be the 3 seed after all of that. And that would put the Road Dogs in the 4, because if you remember, the Regulators beat the Road Dogs head to head and they would have the same record. So again, we're kind of doing if this happens and then that happens, but not crazy. Also not crazy for the Road Dogs to win, and this is all out the window. And then if that happens and the Road Dogs win, the Regulators then are the 4 at the highest because they lost to the Halfway Crooks in week 1. All right. Enough talking. The playoffs will be here next week. We'll get the bracket up for you guys and all ready to go. But, the 4-5, the 2 will play the 7, which is the Gym Rats. So depending on who gets that 2 seed, and the 3 will play the 6. So, we still, I guess, could get a Regulators Air Mambas, first round if some things go that way. But guys, really good job on the post-game show. One more week and the good stuff. The playoffs are here. All right. So good job by you guys. And we'll see you next week for week 9, we're going to call it. Thanks for watching.